Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Project Flux podcast and Happy New Year. This is the first Project Flux podcast of 2025, and we hope that all of you and your families had a fantastic end to 2024 and beginning to 2025. We are super excited for what's going to be happening in the next 12 months. And Yoshi, very happy New Year to you, mate.
Yeah, you too, buddy. I think new year, new us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a week off of doing absolutely nothing, eating way too much, and now I'm itching to get back. I don't know about you, but I'm itching to get back and really sort of hit 2025 as well as we ended 2024, really.
Yeah, and if 2025 is anything like our predictions, it's going to be a very significant year for AI.
Yeah, I think, we've kind of touched on it over the course of the last few months, with particularly things like agents, but there's so much more, right? It's not just that. It's going to start infecting so many parts of our lives. So what we did on the newsletter, which anyone who's read that, if not, be waiting for you when you get back to your work emails, we did our predictions, and we wanted to do 10, but we couldn't because there was too many. So we ended up saying, okay, we'll do 15. And we thought we'd just spend this episode running through them and just having a chat about them, because these are predictions. We're not going to get all of them right. And there's going to be stuff that happens that we haven't even considered, I would imagine. So let's just have a chat about that, Yoshi. And, and then next week we get back to kind of the interviews, and so we've got some fantastic guest lines up. And then we just want to say as well, thank you to our sponsors, Construct AI. They've been a massive support of what we've been doing in 2024. And they're also going to be sponsoring us in 2025. So big shout out to Construct AI. We're really proud to be sponsored by them. So that should have been number 16, really, on predictions, shouldn't it? The massive growth of Construct AI. So we'll add that one in straight away. That's a no-brainer, right?
No brainer. I mean, yeah, it's going to be a big year for them, I would say.
Yeah, I think, but because what they've built is actually really good as it is, but that's starting to come into the public consciousness, and it'll be interesting actually to get them back on the show to find out how they're going to incorporate these agentic kind of workflows into Construct AI, whether they've got, plans for incorporating that somehow into the model.
Yeah, I mean, we'll cover this because fine-tuned, specialized capabilities like what they offer is going to be rife within 2025, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's go through them. Any one of these predictions we could probably do a whole podcast on. So we're going to have to kind of go quite swiftly through them, but in no particular order. The first prediction, which I think is a no-brainer, is larger AI models, mainly through the scaling network and training data and training duration. We think that there's going to be a lot larger AI models, but then that does present some challenges in terms of data scarcity, the quality of data, etc. And we've had a peak of that with just before the new year with OpenAI's O3 model suggesting this shift towards reasoning capabilities. So I don't think there's any danger of those AI models not getting bigger. What's your take on this one, Yoshi?
Yeah, so it's obvious in the sense that the scaling hypothesis is a method that has been prominent in getting intelligence to where we are today. And like you mentioned, it was scaling network, it was scaling the data, it was scaling the training times for these models. We are running into this plateau because of the scarcity of data, like you mentioned, James. And Ilya Sutskever likened it to the fossil fuel of AI, right? So now the scaling method is still the popular choice, but it's now starting to scale the inference compute time of some of these models, right? So giving it more time to think, which should equate to thinking and reasoning in that sense.
Yeah. And the kind of fear that a lot of people are saying, well, we've run out of data and we're going to hit a plateau. I always think of the Moore's law. There's been so many times throughout history where people said we've scaled it. There's no further than Moore's law can go, and always gets proved wrong. And I got a feeling it might be the same with this.
Yeah, exactly. But the one thing with large AI models now, I think there's also another slight challenge is that, and again, Ilya also touched on it, with these more advanced models, it's harder to be predictable in terms of what's going to be an output. So you can predict with more precision GPT-4o and other models akin to that. But with these more advanced models like O1 and O3, because they're more intelligent, we don't have that level of predictability. So there's going to be a bit of a lag and a change in the way that we approach and deploy some of these large AI models. I don't think it will be the exact same as how people are used to using
No, they're going to be specialists as well, because the other thing to mention is the cost, right? I mean, we know how much these are going to cost, which brings us to our prediction number two. And these to go hand in hand as these kind of larger specialized AI models get more and more expensive. The second prediction that we made is that we're also going to see an increase in the smaller light models. And we've seen that already with GPT-4o Mini, Meta's Llama, Gemini's 2.0 Flash. So that is always, there's this balance, isn't there, between pushing the envelope and then making it accessible, I suppose. So I don't see that slowing down, and I can see that that's going to be a way that these companies keep the consumer involved in the proliferation of AI and large language models, whilst at the same time pushing the boundaries, right?
Yeah, and the sequence seems to be let's push the boundaries of intelligence first and put cost second, because once we achieve the former and it has an associated elevated level of cost, we can then work through what we know to drive the cost down.
Yeah,
So Moore's law for everything should come into action. But with smaller light AI models, the reason why they're going to be so effective is because of the ROI for businesses. They can't justify spending this much money, and equally, you might not need to have such heavy compute of such a wide general intelligence, right? Within a business, you have specific use cases and a specific market that you play in, and you want to elevate capability in that market. So turning to smaller light models, which will provide a much stronger return on investment, is where it needs to be. But then coming into 2026, I think it will be more accessible to deploy the existing peak of models we have. So O1, I think, will become a lot cheaper by the end of 2025, whereas now it's quite expensive and costly.
yeah, yeah. And we mustn't forget that we still got a long way to go in terms of adoption. I mean, there was a story later on in the newsletter about adoption starting to increase, but there's still a long way to go. And that whilst we get really excited about this race towards AGI, that is not the priority for many people. For many people, it's like, how do I actually use this stuff? What's the ROI on it? And that's why these light models are so important. And the thing is, when we say light models or small models, it doesn't mean they're not powerful.
Mm.
They're just a lot more efficient, and they give you what you need rather than, the reality is a lot of these very, very powerful models like the O3 model, they're not suitable for every task anyway, right? So we mustn't forget that. So they do go, those kind of first two predictions go hand in hand.
Yeah, they
Because
do. And when you start to then build agentic workflows, you have to recognize that you will have multiple different LLMs that are deployed. So having most of those agents powered by costly LLMs, if you have a sophisticated cognitive architecture where you're having cycles continuously running, you're going to rack up costs
yeah,
quickly. So this is why these models are so important, that they are cheap, but they all still also deliver value that will enable agentic workflows to flourish.
yeah. Well, talking of agentic workflows, that brings us on to our prediction number three, which again we've been talking about it loads on the podcast, so should not be a surprise to many. But this move towards AI agents and this move towards multimodal architecture. What we mean is these AI agents being able to ingest images, videos, PDFs, any kind of input into this kind of multi-agent system. And that's going to play out throughout 2025, we think, and probably become more and more mainstream maybe in 2026.
Yeah, and agentic workflows might seem like an obvious one because everyone's talking about it. And it might sound like a cop out that it's one of our predictions because it should be easier to predict, right? But, we'll go on a whim one further and say, look into more detail into this. The transition that I kind of predict will be single agent models initially testing the waters, moving to multi agent systems where the humans define the goal and they defined the playground in which the agents can maneuver in, right? So what steps can they take? What will then happen is you'll then start to get more autonomous agentic systems whereby there'll be humans in the loop, but the agents themselves can also then start to dictate the playground they're working in. So the methods they take. And I think that's going to be an interesting step. And like you mentioned, James, the multimodal element will come in further into the year. But I don't anticipate any self-governing multi-agent systems until the back end of the year or 2026, because I think it'll be too much for companies to.
Well, what we need to do is next December, we'll probably have to run past this episode again and see how we did against these predictions. Because it might move faster than we think. I mean, the one thing with agentic workflows that I've heard a lot of feedback is we talk about it because we understand what it means, but a lot of people don't understand. I think there's going to be a different way of describing them before it becomes mainstream. There needs to be a marketing thing done on it, because agentic workflows does not roll off the tongue, and most people don't understand what you're talking about. So there'll be I can see it having a kind of marketing image makeover.
Yeah. The biggest friction for agentic systems for me is it transcends augmentation more into automation.
Yeah,
Because when you were
yeah,
using ChatGPT, you still needed the user to prompt and to drive the value and then, fit it into where it needs to be. But now with agentic systems, it effectively introduces an agent which is autonomous. So if you are, allowing these agents to work autonomously, it does lead to automation.
yeah. Yeah. Right, let's move on to number 4 then, because we're not doing very well. We said we'll keep this quite short, and we've already gone for quite a while. So number 4, and we've got 15 to go through, remember, is again probably a bit of a no-brainer, because we did talk about it, was the improvements to memory and attention. And we talked about in the newsletter, and I think in the podcast a few weeks ago, about this near infinite attention that the new models are going to have. And this is going to really help the scalability, the ability for these models to recall, the ability for it to reason by understanding you from all your past kind of prompts and work that you've done with it. And because of that, it will improve accuracy. And it will start feeling, I think, over the course of 2025, more like an AI that knows you, rather than something that you've got to prompt. And it will become more, as these things get more and more embedded in systems, whether that's Copilot or Apple Intelligence, it will start knowing you more and more. And I think there'll be a turning point at some point for a lot of people, where they'll be like, wow, okay, it's done something that I wouldn't have even thought of myself. An example, writing an email, and really, really simple example with Apple Intelligence, and it will probably start coming up with prompts about things that you should include in the email that you would have forgotten, because it starts learning about you.
Yeah. So that near infinity memory will be powerful because of that. It will personalize information. But the
Yeah,
one thing that they both do then is it is a big enabler for leveraging the AI on large scale or major projects, because it can now consume a lot more. It can work with many different functions of a project, and it can keep that information consistent with a less propensity to hallucinate. So I think it enables more validity and reliability in a business
yeah,
environment because of memory and attention.
definitely.
I think
And
that
that
would be a key thing.
and that really helps the kind of the naysayers who've tried it and they won't try it again because it didn't quite get the answer right first time, because it will start actually understanding the context of what the prompts are.
Yeah, and the reason why this one's really important for me as well is because when the OE model was teased the other day, one of the biggest narratives that came out was that software engineering or coding is dead because AI can do it for you. Okay, but the problem is when you're continuously coding with some of these models, it will start to forget the context. So when you're then continuously writing code, you'll lack consistency. So you
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
compartmentalize how you're coding and packaging things and moving back and forth. So with memory and attention, that then might lend to that hypothesis.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But without this, I think it might not. I think this is a really important development for Google and Microsoft to pioneer in 2025.
Cool, cool. Right, let's change tacks a little bit now. The fifth prediction is, again, we've covered it a lot, is about robotic AI. So this is the intersection of humanoid robots being powered by AI. And we've seen a lot of examples from Figure 2 and then the one from Tesla, which may feel like a distant reality, but actually, if some of the timescales are to be believed, a lot of these are going to be making their way into kind of consumer environment in the not too distant future. And I think in 2025 we're going to start seeing these robots. They're already being used in kind of manufacturing facilities such as BMW, but I could see them starting to be used in healthcare and maybe even construction. Just the start of it. I'm not saying by the end of 2025 we're going to have every single construction site with robots, but I would be surprised if by the end of 2025 we don't get a story from somewhere of a contractor using some kind of autonomous robot on site, not just for monitoring, for doing.
Yeah, and I think as well it's worth mentioning that when we speak about robots, we're not just referring to humanoid like robots, we're referring to different types of robots. I mean, Unitree's dog-like robot that they released, you can buy now, or the Massimo from that's on the Amazon data center projects. These aren't humanoid, but they are AI powered. Now, I think there will be huge increase in productivity and efficiency that most consumers won't see because they're not engaged with some of these on construction sites, for instance. I think that will be the key thing. But yeah, I don't think it'll be like the Tesla event, where you're intermixing with humanoid robots as such. I don't think we'll see that, but we might see more events like that, more things showcasing these capabilities. I think we'll start to see. But robotic AI is one that will, it bridges the gap into humans, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
And what about price point? Do you think we see the price? I mean, it's already not horrifically expensive for some of these robots, like no more than a car. But do you see the price point starting to drop as well?
I eventually, I don't think yet.
Not 20.
No, not 25. I think it will still be expensive because it's still in this playground phase. In terms of software and hardware, in terms of what it takes to actually deliver these things into a real world environment. But I think it's going to be a key thing in 2025. This, like I said, this is the Pink Floyd thing. Welcome to the machine, right? This is where you're actually getting into physical AI,
Yeah.
and this is going to be exciting because I think this will exponentially grow quicker than most other things. But I think that exponential growth will come in 2026, not 2025.
26, 27, yeah. I think we'll start seeing some use cases. So super exciting. Number 6 is more rather than technical, more of a methodological kind of prediction around the impact of generative AI. Because what we've seen so far with a lot of these studies is that it's still not being widely adopted in organizations. And I don't think we'll get to like 100% adoption or anything crazy like that by the end of 2025. It's still going to be slower than expected. But don't forget, it's compared to other technological revolutions, it's still moving very, very fast. So if you go to the internet technological revolution, it took a number of years, probably, the best part of a decade to go from the start to the fact that it was widely adopted. So we are moving fast. It may feel like it's slow because we talk about this all the time, but it is still moving fast. And I just see in 2025, not a full kind of 100% adoption, but just getting closer and closer. By the end of 2025, a lot of leaders within companies will start actually understanding the value. They will approve the ROI. They'll start integrating AI into ways that support their business cases. And I think that a lot of organizations will start decomposing what they do, their workflows, to get the most out of generative AI rather than the other way around, or trying to fit a square into a round hole. Saying, well, actually, with this technology, are we doing the right things in the first place? And should we change the way that we do things to enable generative AI to get the most ROI from it?
Yeah, and there'll definitely be an increase in shadow AI in terms of people bringing AI back into work themselves.
Yeah, which is a danger as well.
Which is a danger. So then my question to you is, do you now think companies have a better grasp on how to, know what to use these things for and then deploy it securely? Or do you think are we still in the same position that we were a year ago?
We're not in the same position we were a year ago. I think companies are definitely better informed, and some of them have even experimented and got some good use cases. So we're still in. It's a work in progress. We're better than we were last year, but we still got a way to go.
Yeah, and then my other question for you then is, do you think there will be a driver for companies to deploy locally, or do you think they'll still rely on cloud strategies?
Depends who you are. I mean, if you're, a multinational organization, you might be able to sort of be a bit more bullish. But if you're an SME or a small company, you're going to have to rely on sort of third-party
I agree.
applications. I think that's be the way it's done. Although, having said that, then you've got the third thing, which is the SMEs, right? The people just starting up and they've got a blank sheet of paper in front of them. And going back to that kind of decomposition of workflows, that they might look at things totally differently and build things from scratch, ignoring effectively the traditional workflows.
Because it's easier too. It's easier to deploy now because you can build applications with things like Cursor AI and using AI. So it's easier to deploy locally and build applications yourself, and then be more comfortable with the security and safeness of what you have deployed.
Exactly. So yeah, it'd be a good one to watch out for. But moving on to number 7 then, and again a slight change of tact, because we're looking at not just projects, but also how it's going to impact the macroeconomics of the economy. So there's also a big thing around wealth management. And I think we're going to see AI co-pilots starting to change financial advisory, pension funds, really kind of hyper personalized insights. I think we're going to see the stock market start being impacted by the use of AI. I mean, they already are massively reliant on it, but I think that's going to go through another level. And then, I think it's going to be one of those situations where I can't remember who said it. I think it was Yuval Harari who says it might be the point that we go where we're not actually sure how some of these financial institutions are being managed in terms of the AI. Who's at that point? Who's in charge? So I think this is a bit of a risky one in terms of financial management and finances and sort of the macro economy, because we could in 2025 be in a position where we lose a bit of control in terms of the way that we manage finances. I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Yeah, so for me, there's a black box for those that work in the industry
Mm-hmm.
and those who manage these huge portfolios, because AI is making it easier for users and consumers to manage their wealth, because it is such a financial services is such a quantitative industry, and AI is so powerful at pattern matching and pattern recognition. The fact that it can predict markets and it can prescribe you what to do for the user, it's easier for them. But then how that trickles upwards and how those who work in the sector react to then also still provide that USP. Now we can still manage it better for you than an AI can, or some of these out off the shelf softwares, is to be seen. But yeah, hyper personalized insights for the consumer will make it easier and people more confident in investing.
Well, the thing is, though, is that you talk about black box, that you still got a black box that somebody knows what's going on in there. I think we do run the risk that we end up in a situation where nobody quite understands what's in the black box at all anymore, and
Yeah.
it's just managing things. And that, what happens if these insights and these AIs work really well on predictions, like you say? What happens if we have an event which is unknown, something that's never happened before? What does that? It will all be great until we hit that point, and then there'll be no data to back up what happens at that point. So I'm just a bit cautious about this one. But from a consumer point of view, I can see it really, from people just dealing with their day-to-day expenses and stuff. I think we're going to see more and more instruments and tools that enable people to manage their own wealth. And then into kind of healthcare. So, we talked about autonomous robotics starting to address critical healthcare labour shortages, because we've got this awful situation of the labour shortages. So it's not like we don't need these robots to help kind of shore up some of the issues we have. But then we're going to have technologies starting to treat previously untreatable diseases. So we've obviously had the vaccines, which came out during COVID, which were at least partially kind of produced with AI. We're going to see more and more of that. We're going to see, please God, more and more inroads into treating things like cancer, as we get these kind of small, finely tuned data models. I can't remember what we call them, where they're very, very kind of narrow data models or AI models that are trained on a specific task. But that's going to become more and more affordable, I think, during 2025. I don't know. Do you agree?
Yes, I think there'll be a move towards vertical capabilities, like fine-tune imaging for MRI, for instance, and again making it more accessible for the user. They can now better analyze their own health information, relay that back to, like we mentioned before, to some of these GPs, to some of these surgeries. So then it makes it a lot quicker, and it gives more transparency to the person. We saw that Demi Hassabis won a Nobel Prize for AlphaFold 2, so the predicting how proteins fold, and how can you reverse engineer that, for instance, using AI. So it allows us to experiment a lot more effectively without such high level of cost.
Yeah,
Because you can then
exactly.
take solutions from early in vitro to in vivo trials, and through that process through simulation, without having to use it, actually in vivo, in vitro. So I think that's going to be the huge thing, and that's why it's so cost effective. So it's going to be a huge one. And then the robotics element, precision movement, pick and place tasks, which will be key for surgery.
Things like surgery, yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is where we'll start to see those things amplify. But this is something that's going to be healthcare is always quite difficult to kind of predict, because you have to be a lot more conservative with your implementation of it.
Yeah, and obviously the risks, those kind of things going wrong. You talk about experimentation, but it's not like some other industries where the worst that can happen is you might lose some money. This is people's lives you're dealing with, so it
And
becomes
one thing I would also mention on that as well then is healthcare has been a really interesting one for me to see how hallucinations can also work
yeah.
positively. So will we start to see researchers embracing hallucinations to help them discover new ways of treating humans?
See, that's interesting because everyone thinks of hallucinations as a negative side effect of the way these LLMs work. But what you're saying is actually people might start experimenting with hallucinations as a creativity method or a way of actually
To
trying
simulate.
to simulate different things. So yeah, no, super exciting. And actually, I'm going to jump to number 10 now because it relates to this. It's the rise of spatial computing as well. Talking about surgery, spatial computing's had a bit of a bad rap. You know, the Apple Vision Pro has not been a huge success at the moment, but you know, you've got to give it time. But I think 2025 will see. I'm not sure whether they're planning on a release of the next version of it, but I think there's going to be more and more use cases. What they're waiting for is the killer app, isn't it? So there's going to be more and more technology starting to benefit from the use of spatial computing, and healthcare and surgery in particular is a good example of where we can use spatial computing. This is the another way of saying VR or AR, all these different terminologies that are coming out, but it's basically the same thing. So I don't see 2025 as the big breakthrough year. I still think we've got a way to go with the spatial computing because it's just too expensive and the technology is too clunky. I can see more similar to what we were talking about with some of the generative AI. We're just going to see more and more use cases come to life.
Yeah, and I think it'd be a way to experiment with AI to develop a lot of these assets within spatial computing. Because you're creating 3D structures a lot more effectively. We're creating video a lot more effectively. Latency, speed is increasing. There's even if you look into the realms of brain cognitive interfaces, BCIs, and these things. You can read ECGs and then use large language models to then create actual assets in virtual realities. So I think it's going to be a complete experimentation year for spatial computing. The problem they have is still that the hardware is too clunky. So I think until that's fixed, it's not going to pick up. But the finding the opportunities within spatial computing is going to be useful.
Yeah, so we'll see some real use cases, I hope, where it's being used to actually
Yeah.
save lives. So number 10 then is data centers. So with all of this is demanding huge amounts on additional data centers. So I think it goes without saying that there's going to be a massive increase in investment on data centers, and that the complexity of the data centers as well are going to get harder and harder to manage and monitor to make sure that the quality is okay and avoiding anything which is going to have a financial impact. So I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, or is that just a no-brainer? We're going to see more
Yeah,
and more in this.
if we're going to scale these models, we have to house them.
Yeah.
So data centers is going to be key, but there are a lot of risks associated with them, right? The heat, the demand to grow these things, and you have to try and pack so much punch into some of these smaller chips and some of
Do,
these servers. So it's
do you
it's
think there could be a breakthrough this year with something within data centers so that we're not so? Because the big promise, as we always said, is that the AI eventually starts making it more efficient so that we don't need to spend so much money on compute and data centers. Is that a 2025 hope, or is that a
so
way off? Do
what I
we
think
think?
will happen in 2025 is there will be a proliferation of data centers, but I also think there will be small pockets of new innovative ways to compute AI.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
So like
yeah, yeah.
we looked at Final Spark a few months ago, which was those that were running it on brain organoids, for instance, which is kind of an extreme example. But are there going to be other mechanisms to service AI without it being so costly and having to house it somewhere physical at such a large scale? I don't know, but I think we'll start to see more innovation across that realm.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so counting down now to number, and these aren't in order, by the way, so I don't know why I'm doing a countdown, but it sounds good, doesn't it? Mergers and acquisitions. So I think we're going to see there's so many startups out there, and the big players will be sniffing around, and I think we're going to see the successful ones starting to be picked up by the big guys, and we're going to see quite a lot of mergers and acquisitions throughout 2025, 2026.
Yeah, because AI is such a stipulation and such a difficult field to understand. There's so many nuances and so many branches to go into. No company can safely say that they can deploy and build these things from the ground up and deploy it themselves. It's easier to have smaller companies without those guardrails develop some of these technologies. You can then assess it, acquire it, deploy it. It's just so much easier. So mergers and acquisitions is going to be a no-brainer in my opinion. It's just interesting to see which big companies acquire what, because I think coming in 2025, we'll now start to see how a divergence of big tech, how Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and some of these other leading companies, where they play their hand and where they go into. So we said that, Anthropic are leading more towards APIs and OpenAI leading more towards consumers. I think their acquisitions will give an indication of where they're going.
But it also could be, acquisitions to just stop their competitors getting hold of them as well. So there'll be some acquisitions which will be positive acquisitions, i.e. start building them into their platforms. There'll be other acquisitions would just be to kill it before their competitors get it. So it's going to be an interesting space to look out for. Number 12 then, I think this is going to be a huge one. So we haven't talked too much about cryptocurrency, but one of the big things that I can see happening in 2025, in the crypto world, there was the whole meme coin phenomenon that happened over the course of the last year or so. I think the big thing that's going to happen over 2025 is going to be AI agents. And of course, for AI agents to work when it comes to payments, cryptocurrency is the obvious solution to that. So I could see AI agents becoming a huge, and I've looking on the kind of crypto exchanges already, the amount of AI agents that you can buy tokens in is already starting to ramp up. So that convergence of AI and crypto, I think, is just such an obvious partnership.
So you think that will be virtuous in that sense?
I hope so, because if it doesn't, then it will leave me thinking, this to me is the obvious way of crypto entering the mainstream. Because if it's just happening in the background, it's the way that you pay within an agentic workflow or an AI agent for whatever kind of use case it is, and it's just seamless, people will end up in crypto by default.
Yeah.
And that will then have the virtuous, and we've already had the $100,000 Bitcoin, and I think that is forecast to continue to go up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'd be disappointed if we don't see these two technologies converge over the course of the next
Yeah,
year.
I hadn't thought of that one, but I think that's a good point. I think that's definitely a good point. I think, like you said, if you make things seamless and you reduce the friction, it should typically pick up.
Yeah, and also because when we're talking about these agentic workflows, we're talking about global things. So the beauty of crypto is that it's a global currency, and we don't have to worry about exchanges or anything like that. So there's already use cases out there, but I think we're going to see more and more of it enter the mainstream. Number 13 then is kind of something that's been in play for quite some time now, but it's the competition between US and China for the AI supremacy is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. Taiwan's a big part of that. We know that there's a lot of tension in the world at the moment, and I don't think it's an accident that this huge race for AI supremacy is going to be intensifying that. I hope that we see 2025 as being a year of peace in the wider world. My worry is that it also, people make silly decisions politically as well as kind of in other realms of life when your back's against the wall. And at the moment, we're seeing like the dogfight for AI supremacy. It started, hasn't it, in 2024? I just hope we don't end up with a situation where people just make really, really silly short-term decisions.
Yeah, and actually, there was a new model just released, DeepSeek 2, DeepSeek 3.
Yeah, the Chinese one.
And it was a Chinese model that came out, and apparently that's the one that lends to one of these smaller models, but packs really strong intelligence or capability. So it's crushing a lot of benchmarks, and that's an example of where China have learned, delivered, and showcased that look, we are strong players in this industry. You also lead towards drones, and you lead towards physical AI in humanoid robots with Unitary. They are developing, they are leading, and I think they are toe to toe with the US. I think the US just have a grasp on the Western market, right? But we aren't that privy to what they are developing in China. But I think we might start to see more. I think we'll have more access to what China are building in 2025.
But don't forget, I mean, it's a political thing, this as well. The use of AI is the Western world's view of the use of AI is very different from the Chinese, which will be very, very sheltered. Sheltered is the wrong word, very kind of controlled. So, and then of course the chips that power the AI, that is where Taiwan comes in. And, I don't profess to be an expert at it at all, but that's why there's so many of these chips are manufactured in Taiwan. That's why this is going to become such a big issue over the course of the next, well, if not in 2025, over the course of the next decade. So, all we could do is pray that these things get resolved diplomatically, but there is a worry that this AI race will actually intensify the competition between the US and China. Which brings us on to number 14 then, which we did discuss probably about a month back around AI safety levels, and we think we're going to get to AI safety level 3. Do you just want to remind everyone what AI safety level 3 is?
Yeah, so the AI safety levels are Anthropic's method for understanding an AI's risks of catastrophic danger, effectively. And it is then measured against autonomous capabilities, so the autonomy that the AI has, and also the misuse that it will have across key phenomena such as chemistry, biology, radiology, and nuclear. So AI safety level 3 is where the AI itself, these different models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet, for instance, has low level autonomy. And as it moves into the agent space, it will have a growing autonomy. But also at this point, it can provide information at a similar level to what a user can get from Google search. Now, as it proceeds beyond that, this is where the AI models will be able to provide information to the user or act on by itself using information that isn't traditionally found on Google, effectively. So that's how they've managed it. And it's part of their responsible scaling plan. So as they reach these levels, and they've identified that the AI models are at this level of maturity, they will halt development if they don't feel like it's responsible, if they don't think it's safe enough to deploy the next iteration of models, effectively.
Yeah. But going back to the last prediction about China, doesn't mean they'll stop.
Like, it doesn't mean that they'll stop. So this is why there needs to be a collegiate effort. But this ASL level 3 then is basically saying that, yes, we might get to this point we will get to this point in 2025. But what do Anthropic and these other big tech companies do to not reinvent, but innovate new safeguards to mitigate these societal risks? So that's what's going to happen. You're going to see this level of maturity, but then also an advancement on ethics that become deployed in 2025.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Last one, bit of a light-hearted one. We just think AI is going to help you shop. The retail environment has taken a right kick in over the last decade or so in the high street. So I think there's going to be more and more agents within the shopping experience. We've already got something called Rufus within Amazon, and I think that's just going to become more and more normal. And it's similar to the memory features. These kind of AI retail assistants are just going to know you more and more. You know yourself better than you know yourself. So I can see that being another obvious one over the course of next year. A way to make us all spend more money.
Yeah, and this is all part of the Web3 movement, right? Personalization was going to be the thing where we take the internet from communities to the individual. And this is not the easiest way, but people love to shop. They love to show their behavior online.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
one of the easiest to actually personalize. So I think that's a no-brainer.
And that's it. That's our 15. We've done really badly. We massively went over time because we said it would be a short one. But I thought it was important to go through those because I think they're all very, very important, but also interlinked. If you see, all of them are kind of interlinked in some way or another. So it'll be really interesting to come back in 12 months and see how we did. And hopefully this time next year, we'll be looking at, what's the next step in AI. But for now, we've got plenty to get our teeth into. Anything else we missed there, or anything else you want to cover, Yoshi?
No, awesome, mate. I'm looking forward to it. Well, I think it'll be good to see if our predictions come true.
Cool. And then just for all the listeners, thank you for your support as always. 24 was awesome. We want to make 2025 even better. So if you've got any ideas, if you've got any guests, if you want to appear and you think you've got something to say, drop us a line. We really want to make this more and more useful for listeners as we grow, and as we grow quite rapidly, we hope, during 2025. So all we can do is, for those who have been with us since the beginning, thank you. You know who you are. If you've just joined, welcome. You are very welcome. Please pass on the message of what we're all about. If you've got time, please go on and follow on the podcast platform that you use, and also give us a good review, because that helps the algorithm and gets us out to more and more people. So on that note, all we can do is say Happy New Year to you all, and we really, really look forward to spending more time with you over the course of 2025.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.